Music brings us together, even when we're apart. That's why we support Canadian musicians, festivals, and award shows. It's just one of the ways TD's Ready commitment helps build a more inclusive tomorrow.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to TD Halifax Jazz Festival's Virtual and Vibrant 2020, our online programming taking place here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and across Canada. And we're excited for our second Canadian jazz interview with great saxophonist and composer Allison Au. Allison refuses to be defined. She's born to a Chinese father and Jewish mother and raised in the multicultural metropolis of Toronto. And Allison found music as a young child. Jazz became Allison's lab for self-expression, exploration, and musical experimentation. And her work weaves a mosaic of influences into a seamless and soulful sound, a concoction steeped in the tradition of jazz, but skillfully laced with elements of classical, pop, R&B, Latin, and world music. Allison's group, the Allison Au Quartet, formed in 2009, has been nominated for 3 Junos and won the 2016 Juno for Best Jazz Album of the Year for a group for her album Forest Grove. And in 2019, she released Wander Wonder,
I know.
which is also nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year. And so I want to welcome to the show, Allison Au. How are you doing, Allison?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. So how's it going there in Toronto? You just give us some of your thoughts on what's been going on. I know it's really hot there right now, but how are you dealing with that? Not being able to, go play some shows. What's the scene for you?
It's been good. I've been hanging in there so far, of course. Yeah, we're experiencing a heat wave. It's lasted I think just over a week now. It hasn't rained really very much at all. But yeah, I'm grateful that the weather's nice. Amidst this quarantine, I think what made it challenging at the beginning was that it was still cold out. Everyone's literally cooped up in their homes. But now I'm starting to see more and more people going out, of course, and things are opening up slowly. So that's cool. Things feel slightly bit more back to normal. But of course, as musicians, it's still really hard to, I know some people are doing sessions and stuff. I'm kind of slowly easing my way into that in the next couple of weeks. But lack of performances is, as you know, a significant part that's missing, I think, for all of us right now. So that's been challenging. But through this, I've been fortunate to have some private students who wanted to continue through the summer months. So that's been keeping me busy, and I'm still writing some music and practicing as much as I can. So I'm grateful to have good health and to be able to still work on stuff at home. So that's what I've been up to recently.
Great. I find as a person, I'm always on the go, and I'm sure you are as well, hopping from one thing to the next, but having this time to sort of slow down is, in some ways, is a great opportunity to sort of refocus.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a blessing in disguise. I know people who've been hard hit health wise and stuff. I know it's a challenging few months for sure, and frontline workers, of course. But if you're in good health and you're able to do stuff, which I feel like I am, it's been a nice break in a lot of ways. So we're uncertain as to how long it's going to go on for, right, at this point. But I think things are starting to happen slowly.
Yeah. So I'd like to come back and touch on that a little bit later, looking into the future. But I'd like to look a little bit into the past and sort of just talk a bit about your musical experiences and just sort of learn more about how you came to where you are now. I always say this as musicians, you and I went to music school together, and we've interacted with all sorts of different musicians, but we don't often get a chance to learn about sort of people's early beginnings with music. So I'm very curious to know how you sort of got started playing the saxophone or getting started with music.
Yeah. Well, I have to credit my parents. Neither of them are musicians themselves, but I think as kids, they always had a lot of art in the house. My mom's a really avid book reader, and my dad loves music. And as kids, he always had a really extensive vinyl collection at home and CD collection. So that was kind of my first exposure to just picking up records. I think physically having that tangible connection with vinyl and a CD, which we don't see so much anymore either. But I think that was where it started. I remember as early as 6, I was learning how to use his CD player at home, and I wanted to, start playing my own, or pick out his records and put them on myself. So I would say that was probably the first experience of like enjoying listening to music and being mindful of what was involved in trying to get those sounds to come out of the stereo. And then in terms of lessons, I mean, my parents, again, like super supportive of the arts at home. And we would always watch movies and books and went to art galleries and stuff my parents would take us to. So my parents enrolled my brother and sister and I all in piano lessons, and I started piano at 6, which I think is common for a lot of people. And I just continued with piano for a long time. And then when I was of age to audition for a local arts-based school in our neighborhood, I did that, and that started in grade 4. So I was fortunate enough to have been accepted into this program, and it was multidisciplinary. There were acting classes and visual arts classes, and then there were some dance classes, and of course music.
Oh, wow.
And the way the program was structured for this school was half the day was arts, and it could be like a mix of arts, and then half was academics. So I did that from grades 4 to 8. And I would say, in addition to kind of my home environment, which was really rich, I think, in terms of like tangible things and things to look at, that program had a really monumental impact on me. And that's kind of where I was exposed to the saxophone through their band program. And my teacher happened to be a woman saxophone. And for me, that was a really pivotal moment for me, just to see a really strong and incredible role model. And this woman, I think she's retired now, but she was really spunky and energetic. And I think that really drew me to want to learn the saxophone more and just take it more seriously.
Great. Yeah. That's something I find so interesting about Ontario and Toronto, that there are dedicated art schools. That's not something that we have out here on the East Coast.
Okay.
But it's very interesting that you're able to devote, like half of a day to focus on that art path.
Definitely. I think the schools, I mean, I'm trying to think of, there are a few other ones that I know of that are either in the Toronto core or like the suburbs, but you're right. There are a few like that I'm aware of myself too. And they're really valuable, like so important. And there are not enough of them, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So just going back to sort of your discovery with the saxophone, was there sort of like a jazz component to your learning early on, or were you just doing more like traditional band program material?
Yeah, my first year of learning band, I started with the clarinet. And I think there was maybe one jazz tune in the repertoire that year. I think I was in grade 6. So I spent a year learning clarinet, but I loved that song. Whatever that song was, I loved that. So I knew there was something, but I was also aware of what jazz was because my dad had a lot of vocal jazz records and some instrumental stuff. Remember, he had a lot of Nat King Cole, but who also sang and played piano. So I was aware of what the sound of jazz was. I didn't know what anybody was doing on those albums, but I kind of knew that I was gravitating toward that sound already at home. So when I heard it kind of reiterated in a band class, I was trying to figure out what that was. And then when I finally switched to saxophone in grade 7, so I was about 13 at that point, there were more opportunities to play that music. I remember there was an extracurricular jazz combo that year, and it was just introduction to improv and learning some really basic jazz heads. And I took that class. It was like a club. So I was involved in that. So kind of like just trying to get my feet wet, I guess.
Yeah. And so at what point did you sort of decide that you were interested in pursuing music further, or like getting more into it?
I was really kind of like undecided for a long time. I wasn't sure if I would take music seriously enough to be like go kind of pursue it professionally. So in high school, I kind of did a 180 and kind of stopped doing a lot of extracurricular music activities. I went to more of an academic based high school program. So I continued doing private lessons, but I really wasn't sure if I would pursue music post-secondary. But I really wanted, there was something I still didn't really understand about jazz that I really wanted to understand further. And so when it came time to apply for colleges and schools, universities, I applied for science programs. And then I also applied to Humber College. And that was the only music application I did that year. And I was fortunately accepted into Humber, and my logic was just that I would go to Humber for 1 year just to say that I gave myself the chance to try to learn jazz in a bit more detail and depth. But I had such a positive experience at Humber that I ended up finishing the degree. But my intention was only to stay for 1 year, then switch to a science program.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I really wasn't intending to pursue music professionally at all initially. So it was kind of like a weird series of events, or just, I guess, unpredicted, not planned at all. But fortunately, I mean, my parents were super supportive throughout. There wasn't a lot of pressure to make a firm decision at that time. And they were always super encouraging. So I'm really grateful I had that support to kind of explore different options, which I think really allowed me to find music on my own, but I think a lot later than a lot of my peers.
Right. And
Yeah.
were you sort of experimenting with playing in any bands or anything, like when you're in high school, like outside of like the band program?
I can't say I did that. That's something that I kind of regret now, having been through a post-secondary system and seeing the level of playing that was so apparent in my first year amongst my friends and people I looked up to. So I didn't really pursue a lot of extracurricular playing. I was in I think like what do you call it, like a symphonic ensemble through high school,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing jazz related or jazz centric or focused by any means. I didn't really even have a community of peers to session with. Again, because I was in more of a academic oriented program at the time.
Yeah.
So aside from private lessons through my teenage years, I didn't do a lot of my own exploration, like aside from lessons.
Yeah. It's so interesting how there's so many different paths. Like, for myself, especially as a horn player, it's like, I feel like we're involved in a lot of these like band programs, but people that come from like a more rock background, they're like forming like little bands in young ages.
I know.
Yeah. So just sort of moving forward with your music past, I was just sort of thinking about our interactions. We were around Humber at the same time.
Yeah.
I graduated there 2011, which is some time ago now. But just thinking back to some of my earliest memories of interacting with you, I know one of the things that came to mind was that I was involved in a project with yourself and a person named Marco, whose last name escapes me, but a big band project that you were involved with Luis Mario Ochoa.
Yeah.
And I believe that you were one of the band leaders of it was like a sort of Latin salsa band that we were getting into, but I'm just wondering if that was something that you were actively pursuing in different ways while you were at Humber.
I was, yeah. So we would have been 3 years apart, I think. So that's why I remember we totally did that. But I would have missed you in so many of like the other classes, of course, because we were just in different years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think arranging for a large ensemble was something that I was really actively doing when I was in school. And I was fortunate to have great teachers, as I'm sure you did, for the arranging classes. But it was something that I really wanted to delve into deeper because I was just starting to compose, but really hadn't had a lot of experience. So arranging for me was a cool way to learn more about composition just by taking someone else's writing and like trying to figure out how the orchestration works. So that project with Marco de la Cruz, we were in the same year at the time. He was a pianist. He still is a pianist. But we were kind of exploring more of that side of things and trying to find ways to creatively adapt music for the Latin big band, essentially. And Luis Mario Ochoa was a wonderful mentor to me at school. He really encouraged me to start my own band and write my own music and really be kind of self-sufficient as a musician. So it was such a valuable relationship for me in that way. But yeah, orchestrating for a large ensemble, I think, really had an influence on getting me going in the direction of composing. Because again, I really had no experience prior to that. And I think college in that way for me was a huge period of discovery and trying things out and failing and then trying again and seeing what worked and what didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And it really wasn't until after graduation that I started my own band and really started writing on my own. But I think that prior time gave me the tools to be able to do that.
Great. Yeah. So on that note, just wanted to talk a bit about your quartet. So the Allison Au quartet, you're mentioning that's sort of a project that you've had for quite some time now, and have three albums with that band. So I know you've kept the lineup pretty consistent over the course of that the project, with Todd Pentney on keys, John Maharaj on bass, and Fabio Ragnelli.
Yeah.
So I just want to get a bit of an idea of how that band came together, and how you sort of have kept that one consistent group going over the years.
Yeah. A few reasons. I think that the main impetus for me to start my own project was just that, just to have like a comprehensive outlet to work on writing, which again, I was like super new at exploring right after graduation. And then just working on developing my voice as a saxophone player. I mean, Humber College was such a great place to kind of accumulate all this information about how to improvise and how to write music and arrange and stuff, but I really didn't have any way to apply it actively at school. I think a lot of students feel like that. Like there's just so much material to get through and to get through your tests and all that stuff. That there's not a lot of free time to explore on your own and your own way and on your own terms.
Yeah, I'm still applying some of that. I'm like, oh yeah,
I know
it makes sense now, 10 years later.
I know. I feel the same way. I feel like there's so much that I have to learn, and there's so much I don't know. So that was the motivation behind starting the ensemble. And I wanted to play with people that really challenged me creatively. And I think I found that in this group of musicians. And two of them are peers of mine from school, Todd and Fabio. We all went to school. We were at the same year in college. And that's how I became familiar with their playing and wanted to continue to kind of grow with them. And it's been important to me over the last, just over 10 years we've been together as an ensemble, to keep the same lineup. Because I'm sure you have role models too of bands that you admire, that have really grown through, like famous ensembles, you know, like the Coltrane ensemble or Miles Davis group. It morphed.
Mm-hmm.
He stuck with the same group through those stages of his evolution. And that's been something that's been really inspiring to me through my idols to witness that. And I thought it would be a cool experiment to just, if you keep the same personnel, if that's a fixed parameter, how many options can change within that. And I think there's actually quite a lot of freedom of exploration in that, even though there's certain facets that don't ever change. Mm-hmm. And it certainly has been that experience for me. It's been incredibly rewarding working with the same people, but finding ways to grow and branch out from what I know of their capabilities and seeing how I can push them, or how I can push myself and how they challenge me. So yeah, I'm so grateful for the years we've had, and I hope to continue to have growing this trajectory that, like, though I know who they are and I know how they play, there's still so much that I don't know and I want to explore with them as an ensemble.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find, like, with having 3 albums with that group, how did you find like your approach to composition or the group changed, like when you started putting together a new album?
I think it's had subconsciously a very like Ellington effect. And I say that because I'm aware of the way Duke Ellington would compose for his musicians and how some pieces were composed specifically for certain players in his band. I think I started to write like that within 3 or 4 years of playing with the same guys. You start writing for the musicians in your band and you have their musical voice, for me anyway, at the back of my mind. So there are pieces that maybe I didn't explicitly write for one person, but I hear their sound so clearly that it starts to shape the way I was writing. And I kind of have an idea of what things will sound like, though, of course, I'm going to be surprised when we eventually rehearse that piece, whatever new piece I'm working on. I have a very strong concept for the overall vibe or atmosphere that the song's going to have. So it's really shaped my writing in an interesting way that I wouldn't have anticipated otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And do you find, like, what between albums that you're sort of approaching things differently? Because over the past week I've been listening to the albums and sort of just picking up the different sounds. And so, like, for instance, with your latest album, I noticed it kicks off with a very distinct, like, I guess, synthesized keyboard sound. So I'm just wondering if those were sort of conscious decisions in changing the group sound a little bit.
Definitely. I think I'm starting to go a bit more in that direction with stuff I'm writing now. But that was kind of a brainstorming session with Todd, the pianist, and myself. I wanted to incorporate another kind of texture. And even on the last record, we don't use it consistently throughout the record, but I'm just starting to experiment more with what the possibilities of that spectrum could provide for the band. But yeah, we're like always trying to try things out, and I'm open. I try to cultivate an openness in the band when we rehearse to let everyone have their say as to how the piece should be shaped. So we do really try to have an open dialogue, and I really want to hear the guys' feedback. And they also heavily edit the pieces. So, I mean, through performance and like repetitive performances and stuff like that. So a lot of the pieces that I'll bring in, they actually change drastically over multiple shows. And I try to let that process be as organic as possible and never assume that what I've written on the page is final by any means. It's always like, everything to me is always like in constant state of change.
Yeah. Great. So with the idea of sort of just like a consistent group, I know you mentioned John Coltrane, Miles Davis, but I'm just wondering if there's any other groups or artists that sort of influence or have influenced the sound of your quartet.
A lot. I think that's why I don't, or I can't always pinpoint my exact influences because there's so many musicians I think are inspired by everything they've ever listened to in their lifetime. I mean, jazz specific, certainly a lot of saxophone quartets and probably more on the contemporary side. I've been really inspired by the quartets of Seamus Blake and Will Vinson, David Binney, Miguel Zenon. I guess a lot of these are alto players for sure. Yeah, Steve Wilson is another alto player I checked out a lot in college. I love Joe Henderson, Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Charlie Parker. You know, all those guys have had a huge impact in the way that they wrote music for their ensembles. Really, like the smaller ensemble stuff for my personal writing right now has had a huge impact on me. But then at the same time, I love a lot of Brazilian composers as well, like Antonio Carlos Jobim and some of his more lesser known pieces of music that I started checking out in college and after college. Djavan is another Brazilian artist that I started listening to a lot more prolifically in the years since graduating school. And then more like orchestral types of things, or like orchestral in the jazz context, like Maria Schneider, I think has had a big impact on my writing. Yeah, just more uses of texture and color. Somebody like Vince Mendoza, of course, who's a great composer and arranger and writes for a lot of different styles of and sized ensembles as well. So I think there's a lot of stylistic things at play in my writing, to the point where even now I don't always identify as a jazz specific composer. I think I'm certainly in the medium of jazz because of the element of improvisation and the instrumentation. Like ultimately I play saxophone. It's inherent to the tradition of the instrument. But a lot of times I just find that I'm writing music that's like Allison music, you know, for lack of a better description. And it's just the product of things that have moved me. And they just come out regurgitated in some weird way that is just unique to me, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point, one other thing that I had on my mind after listening to your music is just about the idea of, like, I really find that when I hear you play, it's such a distinct and a fantastic sound.
Thanks.
That I can really hear you in the sound of that saxophone. So, and another thing that came to mind, going back to our Humber days, was being in those practice mods and hearing you like really working on the saxophone tone, doing all those like long tones and things like that. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about developing your own sound on your instrument and sort of what went into getting that.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, it's a big question.
Yeah, but probably a lot of the things that most saxophone players study and continue to work at, you know, at school and then afterwards as well. I mean, I was fortunate to have some really wonderful saxophone teachers through my studies. A prominent person for me is Kelly Jefferson, who's a wonderful tenor saxophone player based in Toronto. And I think he really shifted my notions of what a good sound is. I think it's so subjective, and I don't think it's a black and white issue by any means. It's very personal to you, and I think it's an ongoing journey for any brass woodwind instrument, where so much of it is like how you internalize your breathing and how you're hearing things conceptually. But a big theme through my studies with Kelly Jefferson is just the notion of flexibility and finding a way that you can execute things on your instrument that is not restricted in any way and feels, I mean, just to give you a certain freedom that you feel you can use to express yourself. And even that I know is subjective to a lot of people. And I'm still working on sound and finding ways to expand my sound and continue to feel like I'm playing with as much breast support and openness as I can. So it's something I continue to work at. But he really kind of turned me on to that idea in a way that I wasn't exposed to with other teachers in the same way. I mean, everyone had wonderful things to share, but he is a very, very open and broad concept of what that can be. And I think it's really great for young students like myself at the time. Become times where I'm structuring lessons and with certain technique approaches is really important, of course. But I think for certain students, and I would probably put myself in that category, we just need to know that there are a lot of possibilities and many approaches to those, like to get the end result. And some students just need to attack it from different perspectives. And I think his was one that just really opened my eyes to being like, oh, yes, there are rules to follow and I'm going to continue to pursue those. But if you try to open your mind a little bit more, you might get there a different way. And it might not be a conventional way, but you're going to find it somehow. You just have to keep trying it from a lot of different angles. It's not necessarily one way to do it. So yeah, I mean, long tones, of course, is something that he gave me some really great exercises to practice with that. And for saxophone, practicing overtones and really understanding the richness and frequencies that you can try to get out of the saxophone. And a lot of his warm up and approaches to sound, I continue to practice very diligently today. That's something that I is in my practice on a daily basis. If I don't do anything else, I work on sound.
Yeah. And I find it really requires a lot of patience from the people around you too.
That's right. Yeah. Your neighbors have to be very understanding. That's true.
So just going on to this is the part of the TD Halifax Jazz Festival. I know you were here in 2017 and we're part of the Stingray Rising Star program that we had here. But I know that was part of a cross Canada tour. So I'm just wondering if you remember your time here in Halifax and what that was like and how that whole tour was like, you know, playing consistently across the country.
Oh, it was great. We had an amazing time in Halifax. It's such a great city, so vibrant. I remember the day we played, it was on the outdoor stage. I think it was by the water.
Yep.
And it was very hot. And I remember as soon as we started playing, we're all just like pouring sweat, but it was a lot of fun. And I remember meeting some great people and we had a chance to listen to the other bands that were part of the festival as well. I wish I had more time to spend. I feel like the biggest downside with touring, as you know, is just not being able to see enough of the city that you're playing in and really kind of get a vibe for the, I don't know, like local eats and places to hang out and scenery and stuff. It's so fleeting. You're in and out. You have a night max and you have to leave the next day. So that's the only thing I don't like. And as we all know, traveling across Canada is increasingly more expensive. And now ultimately it's difficult at the moment. But yeah, I just wish I had more time in each place. But it's great. It's really awesome to connect with new listeners and to meet different promoters like yourself and other people involved on the backside of things to see how everything comes together for a festival. Like it's pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. It's pretty amazing.
And how did you find like performing with the group? I'm not sure how many dates you had in that tour, but performing like a big tour like that as a jazz group.
It's so invaluable. And I think increasingly as, you know, those week-long stints that we would hear about from our teachers or our idols of how they used to have like week-long engagements at the Village Vanguard or whatever club in New York, you know, decades ago. It doesn't exist anymore. So I think touring is the closest experience for a band to have to really working on material consecutively. And I mean, there's no words to express how valuable that is to me. All the touring opportunities that my ensemble has had have been like really like the pinnacle of my music experience, I think, in my career so far. Like it's really been such an eye-opening experience to travel and play and work out material and try things differently and then change things. And yeah, it's such an incredible experience.
Great. So we're almost out of time here, but I just wanted to touch on a couple other things. I know previous to sort of everything shutting down, I was following you on social media as you were preparing for your newest project, the Migration Suite. And I found it so fascinating that you were able to sort of trace the roots of some of your family heritage. So I wonder if you could just talk a bit about that and what's that leading to now that sort of everything sort of went to a halt.
Yeah, so my ensemble was super fortunate to have the opportunity to be commissioned. So I was able to write some new music for this project as part of a festival called the 21C Festival that's hosted at Kerner Hall in Toronto, part of the Royal Conservatory of Music. So I had this really unique opportunity to write new music based around a theme of my choosing. And I know the band was informed that we would be opening for Danilo Perez's Global Messengers ensemble. So I wanted to find a theme that would kind of tie into the other band that we were opening for that evening. And I just realized as I was trying to think of a theme, I really didn't have to look very far because my own family history is global in scope. So with a little bit of research and talking to my parents and extended family, I went through a lot of old family photographs, and that kind of spurred the inspiration for this current project that I'm working on right now. It culminated in a performance in January where I premiered 8 new pieces that are kind of like mini pieces that comprise a suite, about 25 minutes in length. And for this project too, I had the chance to expand the ensemble. So it's the quartet, and then we're very lucky to have Laila Bialy featured on vocals. I had taken some poetry and adapted it to the music. And then we had a mini string section of violin and cello and vibraphone as well. So Alin Hamzi and Amal Arulanandam on strings, and then Michael Davidson on vibraphone. So it was an 8-piece ensemble. So it was really, really an interesting sonic exploration for me, and something I haven't really tried with my own music before. And it was really cool. I learned a lot from that experience, and we're hoping to record the project in the next year. But of course, it's hard to kind of get a project like that off the ground at the moment. Yeah. So right now I'm just in like the brainstorming phases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did you find sort of creating, I always find it interesting, like people's approach to creating instrumental music, but with like a specific theme or like idea, like cultural idea behind it. So how did you find like interpreting something into instrumental music? What was your approach?
It was really challenging actually, because it's the first time that I've adapted lyrics. Like I've never worked with lyrics before with my own music. So it was very new, but what actually made it easier, I think I was really apprehensive to start. I knew what the instrumentation was going to be and what I wanted to do conceptually. But when I actually started, I allowed the lyrics of the poetry that I used to inform the writing. And that's a very new approach for me, of course, because I hadn't done it before. But once I got started and started playing around with words, it actually unlocked some new ideas for me that I don't think I would have otherwise discovered in myself. But yeah, really like taking the poetry, or if you're a lyricist, like using that to find sounds that kind of connect with the emotion of the word. That kind of became my approach. I know it sounds a little abstract, but I try to use that to inform how I was going to approach the writing. Mm-hmm. So I'd find chords or just try to write a melody with the words and then try to fill in the harmonic information afterwards. But yeah, using words as a launch pad was really different.
Yeah, and it seems like it's be a really interesting way to sort of expand your creative approach too, like in an overall experiment.
Definitely. And I'm someone who typically writes bottom up. Like often I start with like an ostinato bass line or a chordal progression. That's been the bulk of how I've written music for my previous work. So this was a really interesting learning experience. So I just made sure I set a block of time where I allocated writing time just to try out a lot of different things. And a lot of my process too, I record myself with a digital recorder on my phone. So a lot of it's like trying to gain objectivity as I'm writing and listening to things back, having stepped away from the keyboard or my piano for a bit. And just trying to have distance as I was writing through this process also really helped me, because I think an issue for me and perhaps for a lot of writers is you spend so much time and you're so immersed in the music you're writing that I think it's possible for me anyway to get too close to it.
Mhm.
So a lot of my writing process now is actually like setting a timer and walking away. Like I'll write for an intense period of time and then leave and then try to like forget what I wrote. Just to come at it with like fresh ears.
Yeah, of course. I find like sometimes the best or a successful piece comes from something that, you know, was left on a recorder for like 6 months and I come back. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I know. And it's a cool experience too, because you might be pleasantly surprised, right, with what you had written. But at the time, either you think it's silly or vice versa. You spend so much time, you think it's amazing, and you come back, you're like, oh, that wasn't that great. I'm going to try a different idea, you know, or.
Yeah. So we're just one last question before we wrap up here. Just curious to know, so, you know, as this time we've sort of, the music industry is essentially shut down and slowly regaining its legs in some form or another. But I'm just wondering, you know, there's lots of shifts in sort of our approaches to music. And I'm just wondering in terms of the music industry and sort of your role in it. I'm just wondering what your sort of hopes and dreams are for the music industry moving forward, and like where you'd like to see things going, maybe just in specifically to like people's approach to jazz or the way we present music. Just curious to know if you have any thoughts or feelings about that.
Oh man, yeah, I mean, this time I think has been a really intense time of reflection. I mean, I obviously think I hope things can kind of go back to some sort of normalcy, but I think that notion of what normal is now is going to change inevitably. It's going to be a new normal. I hope we can go back to live performances, whether they're in a different type of format or the way the audience, of course, is laid out. Certainly in Toronto, it's a huge issue because the city is so big, and the events that we do have are very often well attended, like outdoor festivals and things like that. So if that means that audience has to be redistributed or some way to still have that live element, because I think now it's just really challenging, though I admire so many incredible artists who've come online to kind of translate their work online now to this platform or to social media platforms. Of course, that energy that we get from the audience that so many live performers feed off of is missing. So in whatever iteration it happens, I hope we can get back to some kind of live performance. I hope this time brings to the public a reminder of some sense of how valuable the arts are in general. You know, I think so many of us, I mean, artists included, we take for granted that with access to things online, things are like readily available and often free or at minimal or no charge.
Mm.
You know, we can find paintings online searching on Google and stuff like so quickly. But I hope that the mainstream public is reminded that these types of expressions of music or music theater or dance still deserve to be enjoyed in a live context. And I think the lack of the performances have made people miss, you know, what they took for granted before. And I hope there's kind of like a resurgence and a re-energization of interest in consuming arts in the live context. So I hope people become aware, and just non-practitioners of the arts, just people who enjoy and want to consume it, they see the value of going to show, you know?
Yeah.
Where now we really have no choice but to consume it at home. I hope people are reminded like going out is like even better, you know, to enjoy that art form.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place to call it. I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to
Oh my
converse.
goodness. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, have some conversation. If you could just hit us where people can find you online. I know you've got some albums out, and you know what? Last time I said, I regret not getting one of those T-shirts. So maybe...
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm on all the social media platforms. My website is AllisonAu.com. So ALLISONAU.com. And my music's available on Bandcamp and all streaming platforms. And my social media handle, I'm trying to think now. Instagram, it's Allison Au Music, and it's the same on Twitter. And I believe on Facebook, it might just be Allison Au Quartet. But I'm sure if you were to Google my name, it would come up at some point.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we can get you out here in Halifax sometime in the future.
We would love it. We would love it. Thank you so much. And bravo to everything you guys are doing with the festival, the online edition this year. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Music brings us together, even when we're apart. That's why we support Canadian musicians, festivals, and award shows. It's just one of the ways TD's Ready commitment helps build a more inclusive tomorrow.